Right now, as you watch this video, 127 million Americans are on the verge of losing everything they have. It's not that they might lose it. It's not that they might lose it under certain conditions. It's not a risk contingent on a decision politicians will make in the coming quarter. They will lose it. And the most alarming part of this sentence is the second half. Most of them have absolutely no idea this is going to happen. They're going about their lives as usual, checking their bank balances, monitoring their 401k statements, feeling secure in the usual way, maybe even optimistic, completely unaware that the ground beneath everything they've built is slipping away in a way that no election, no policy, no central bank decision, and no technological breakthrough can reverse. What I'm about to show you is not a theory. It's not a prediction based on an economist's model. It's a pattern that has been documented, verifiable, and repeated with the mechanical precision of something that has already occurred 27 times before. As of January 2025, the U.S. federal government faces a massive debt of $36.2 trillion. This figure has just surpassed the largest debt recorded in the past 2,000 years of economic history, a milestone that has occurred exactly 27 times. 27 different civilizations, 27 different currencies, 27 different governments, each with its own army, its own technologies, its own belief systems, and its own reasons for believing they were fundamentally different from every civilization that had crossed this threshold before them. And over 2,000 years, there was not a single exception. The outcome was always the same. For the majority who are unaware of what is happening and cannot understand it, the total annihilation of existence. For the community that can understand what is happening, however, a magnificent transfer of wealth that will continue for generations, and the complete restructuring of the economic order, which either condemns the former middle class to a marginal existence or eliminates it entirely. In this situation, we are at the third level of this four-stage model. One level remains, and what I want to show you will fundamentally and permanently change your perspective on everything currently happening in America. Rest assured, everything you think you know about the economy, your savings, and your retirement security will soon be called into question. My intention is not to scare you. However, being in a comfortable position right now is actually the most dangerous position you could be in. Those who lost everything in every past currency collapse were not foolish people. They were not uneducated. They were not people who didn't work hard or save diligently. They were people who, unaware of the mathematical laws determining whether any system would survive, placed their complete trust in the system they were part of. History does not repeat itself, but it rhymes perfectly, and what is currently unfolding in the United States follows a rhythm that has never ended with a different outcome. Let me show you this mechanism, because once you understand it, you cannot ignore it. You cannot pretend not to know it, and most importantly, you can use it. Every collapse in history follows the same four-stage model. Whether the subject is ancient Rome, Weimar Germany, or the United States in 2025, there is no difference. The model is exactly the same. The first stage is foundational. A nation or empire establishes a stable monetary system. The people trust it. Trade flourishes. Wealth multiplies. The diversity of trade expands. Everything appears solid, enduring, and unshakable. This stage can last for decades, even centuries. The longer it lasts, the stronger the sense of invincibility grows. People forget all the more that it could ever end. They begin to view stability not as something that has been built and must be maintained, but as something that simply exists, like air, gravity, or daylight. This forgetfulness is not foolishness. It is human nature, yet it is the seed of every subsequent collapse. For a system that people have forgotten could fail is a system that has lost its most vital defense mechanism. The second stage involves expansion and the devaluation of money. The government needs more money. This need may stem from a war, or perhaps massive social programs, or it may be due to corruption and institutional decay that have been draining the treasury for decades. The cause is never the same. The mechanism, on the other hand, is always the same. They cannot raise taxes because the population is about to explode. They cannot cut spending because every program has a voter base that would destroy any politician who touches it, so they do something else. Something quieter. Something most people don't notice at first. They devalue the currency. They print money in excess of the economy's output. They borrow against the future generations who haven't voted yet and haven't made their voices heard. At first, this looks like prosperity. Credit flows everywhere. Asset prices begin to rise. Stock markets break record highs. Real estate prices rise parabolically. On paper, everyone feels richer. But this is an illusion based on the expansion of the money supply. And like any illusion, it requires constant maintenance and eventually, inevitably, shatters. The third stage is the loss of control. The debt becomes mathematically unpayable. From a political perspective, it is easy to pay off. From an economic perspective, however, paying it off is not painful. Mathematically, it is impossible to pay off and the numbers become inconsistent. Inflation begins to grow slowly at first, then creeps, then runs, and finally accelerates rapidly toward figures that would have seemed like science fiction a decade ago. The government attempts to pay off the existing debt by printing more money. This leads to even greater inflation. More inflation requires more money to be printed. Printing more money leads to even more inflation. A feedback loop emerges that cannot be stopped by policy alone, because every tool that could be used to stop it would also break something else that the system cannot survive without once it collapses. Smart money begins to move. People who own real wealth and are truly aware of what is happening begin to convert paper money into tangible assets such as gold, silver, real estate, and operating businesses, things that cannot be created by printing. And while the government watches all of this unfold, it reacts exactly as every government throughout history has. Price controls, capital controls, propaganda campaigns, manipulation of statistics. None of it works. It has never worked. The fourth stage is the inevitable outcome, the collapse of the currency. Either hyperinflation, where the numbers on your bank statement remain merely numbers while your money essentially becomes worthless, or large-scale deflation caused by a systemic default, where the entire system freezes up all at once. Overnight, savings vanish. Pension payments disappear. The middle class, the productive backbone of society, people who do everything right, work hard, save diligently, and trust the institutions around them, is completely wiped out. Wealth concentrates in the hands of a minority who position themselves correctly before the collapse. Then a new system emerges from the depths. People forget that this is the beginning of the end. Trust is slowly rebuilt, and the cycle starts again. This model is not a theory. It is not a prediction or an assumption. It is not a topic economists discuss at academic conferences. It is a historical law as certain as gravity. And I will prove this to you right now with 3 undeniable pieces of evidence spanning 2,000 years. We begin in Rome. The year is 64 AD. Rome is the largest empire in the world. The denarius is the world's global reserve currency, a silver coin containing 95% pure silver. Merchants in Britain, Egypt, Spain, and Mesopotamia accept this coin without hesitation. Trade spanning 3 continents continues through this currency. The Roman economy boasts the most advanced trade system the world had ever seen up to that point. Banks facilitating transactions from Scotland to Persia, insurance mechanisms for merchants crossing the Mediterranean, and a legal framework for trade, unparalleled for over 1,000 years after Rome's fall, are all in place. The foundation is not merely stable, but enduring. It is destined to be. It is inevitable. It is the kind of thing you cannot even imagine coming to an end, having existed for so long that no one alive today could possibly remember its beginnings. The first phase has been fully completed. Then the costly wars begin. Nero needs money, a great deal of it. Palaces are being built. Public spectacles are being organized. The people are being kept in check with bread and circuses. And the borders stretching across the known world are being defended. He cannot raise taxes enough without sparking a rebellion, and he is well aware of this. So he makes a shrewd move, something that appears to cost him nothing. He reduces the silver content in the denarius from 95% to 90%, just 5 points. The coin still looks the same. It still bears the imperial seal. When you hold it in your hand, it still feels like money. No one really notices. No one complains. The economy keeps flowing, and Nero keeps spending. It always starts this way. Not with some dramatic moment everyone can point to and say, that's when it began, but with something so small, so gradual, so easily rationalized, that by the time the cumulative effect becomes impossible to ignore, the process has already become irreversible. This situation persists for generations. Emperors succeeded one another. Wars followed one after another. Each time the devaluation is slightly greater than the last. Each is justified by an urgent crisis that is expected to be resolved, yet none of them solves anything. By AD 217, during the reign of Emperor Caracalla, the silver content of the denarius had fallen to just 50%. Half of the coin is now made of base metal. By AD 270, the silver content had been progressively reduced to below 5%. The coin was essentially worthless bronze, and the silver plating applied to it would wear off over the course of days in your pocket, leaving you with a bronze coin. So, what happened to prices during this 2-century-long period of value loss? In AD 1 pound of gold could buy approximately 40 pounds of wheat. This was a stable and rational ratio reflecting the actual output of the Roman economy. By AD 300, the same 1 pound of gold could buy 120,000 pounds of wheat. The reason for this was not that gold had gained value and become more precious. Gold remains constant. The reason was that the currency used to price everything had essentially become worthless. While the unit of measurement had been reduced to a mere token, the things being measured remained the same. The government tried to prevent this. In 301 AD, Emperor Diocletian issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, sentencing merchants who charged more than the official price set by the government for any goods or services to death. They executed people for charging market prices. Think about what that means. The Roman government was so desperate to maintain the illusion of a functioning currency that it was even prepared to kill people who had accepted the true market value of goods. So what was the result? Within a few months, goods had completely disappeared from the market. Why would a farmer bring grain to the city to sell at government-controlled prices that didn't even cover production costs? Why would an artisan continue to produce goods knowing that half the value of the money he deserved would vanish? The official economy ground to a halt. The black market exploded. Cities were left deserted. People abandoned city life and returned to subsistence farming because the complex monetary economy that had made Roman civilization possible had ceased to function. By the year 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire had completely collapsed. This is precisely the point that history books often get wrong. They tell you that Rome fell because of barbarian invasions. This is a misunderstanding of the event. The barbarian invasions occurred because of Rome's economic collapse. A dynasty that could no longer pay its soldiers' wages, supply its cities with provisions, or maintain its infrastructure had long since ceased to function as a political entity. The invasions were not the cause of the collapse. They were merely signs of a collapse that had already taken place. Cities with populations in the millions shrank to just a few thousand. Aqueducts fell into ruin. Roads collapsed. The legal and commercial framework that had connected the entire known world became a patchwork of local regulations. It took a full 1,000 years for Europe to regain the level of economic development and living standards that Rome had achieved. And the Roman middle class, merchants, traders, and small landowners, which had formed the backbone of what the world had until then recognized as the most advanced economy, was completely and utterly wiped out. But some people did not perish. This is the part no one ever taught you, and it is the most important chapter in all of history. Those who foresaw the developments and withdrew their wealth from the depreciating currency to invest in tangible assets before the collapse accelerated survived without suffering any loss. Anyone who grasped this cycle and invested their denarii early enough in land, gold, or productive assets preserved their wealth. When the clouds parted and a new order emerged from the ruins, they were the ones who owned what remained: land, production capacity, buildings still standing. Their ability to understand what was happening before the masses gave them the opportunity to acquire the remnants of civilization almost for free. Does this sound familiar? It should. Because we are currently watching the same movie again, only with more zeros in the debt column and different actors. Let's turn to the year 1914. Germany is one of the most industrially advanced nations in the world. It boasts a sophisticated banking system, a world-class manufacturing infrastructure, and scientific excellence in chemistry, engineering, and medicine that no other country can match. The mark is stable and reliable. People have savings, retirement plans, mortgages they faithfully pay, and the expectation of a future that looks like a better version of today. Then World War I begins. War, as always, means money, an incredible amount of money. Germany cannot raise enough taxes to cover this without destroying the economic activity that underpins its war machine. So they print money by borrowing. They convince their citizens and themselves that this is temporary. Once they win the war, the reparations they'll receive from the conquered countries will cover all expenses. They'll win, pay off the debt, and all of this will be written off as an unpleasant memory. Governments always tell themselves this in the second phase. This is always wrong. The Treaty of Versailles is signed, and Germany loses the war. To prevent Germany from becoming a military threat again, the Allies demand reparations amounting to 132 billion gold marks, a sum greater than the country's total GDP. Since Germany lacks gold reserves, it cannot pay the debt in gold. Therefore, it makes the payment in paper currency. It prints marks, then more marks, then trillions of marks, then quadrillions. Numbers never before uttered in human economic history, because no human economy had ever needed to count such high figures. In 1918, 4.2 marks bought $1. This is a figure close to that parity. It is a functional currency. Just 5 years later, in November 1923, it took 4.2 trillion marks to buy the same dollar. A loaf of bread that cost 250 marks in January 1923 cost 200 billion marks by November of the same year. Not by the end of the decade. The same year. 11 months. Workers began demanding their wages daily, even every half day. They started spending their morning wages by lunchtime, so they wouldn't lose half their value by dinner time. Families needed wheelbarrows full of money just to do their grocery shopping. Children use piles of worthless billion-mark bills as building blocks, simply because the paper itself had no value left, and they could at least stack them up. The government tried various methods: price controls, capital controls, a rationing system, propaganda campaigns telling citizens that the economy was actually strong, and that the crisis had been created by foreign speculators and Jewish financiers. This lie, they told, had sown the seeds of something that would later lead to the deaths of millions. They blamed everyone. They blamed everyone except the printing press operating in their own basement. None of it worked. Not a single intervention altered the course of events by even 1%. The German middle class, educated professionals, doctors, lawyers, engineers, professors, people who had accumulated wealth through careful and disciplined work over 3 generations, was wiped out. All the wealth accumulated over 3 generations became worthless and turned to rubbish in just 11 months. In 1922, retirement savings that could have bought a spacious and comfortable home were, by 1923, not enough to buy even a single loaf of bread. Pension payments became a laughingstock. Bank accounts turned into mere scraps of paper. The economic structure built over generations vanished in less time than it takes to carry a child to term. However, there is a truth that most people do not know, that is not taught in schools, and that was removed from history books because it did not fit the universal narrative of suffering. During the Weimar era, some people became multimillionaires. As the collapse unfolded slowly, those who understood this cycle and invested their wealth in tangible assets, such as real estate, gold, foreign currency, and productive businesses that produced real goods, survived without suffering any loss. When the new currency was introduced and stability was re-established, Germany was now in their hands. The factories were theirs. The land was in their possession. The buildings were under their protection. While everyone else assumed this would eventually come to an end, they, having understood what was happening, purchased the entire industrial capacity of one of the world's most advanced nations for practically nothing. You know what happened next. The political vacuum created by the complete elimination of the German middle class, along with the resulting despair, anger, and the total loss of trust in institutions in the future, laid the groundwork for the rise of the Nazi Party. Economic collapse does not merely destroy wealth. It also shatters the social fabric. It erodes trust between citizens and institutions, between neighbors, and across generations. And into this void, this realm of helplessness, anger, and despair, extremism flows like water through a broken pipe. The lesson to be learned from Weimar is not merely about currency. This lesson concerns what happens to a society when its fundamental economic structures are destroyed, and people who have built their lives around those structures suddenly find themselves with nothing. Now let's turn to the present, because Venezuela is recent history. Venezuela is not a century ago. Venezuela is happening right now, in our lives, in our time, to real people with smartphones, internet access, and all the other signs of modernity. The year 2000. Venezuela is an oil-rich nation that has proven it possesses far larger oil reserves than Saudi Arabia and other oil-producing countries around the world. The economy is growing. The bolivar is stable and reliable. People have lives, savings, and plans for the future. Venezuela is expected to become South America's success story, a country where its natural resource wealth will translate into prosperity for the entire population. Hugo Chavez comes to power in 1999 and significantly expands social programs. Government spending skyrockets. However, oil prices are also high, so this works for a while. Everything seems sustainable. Revenue flows in from exports. Everything truly seems to be working. Then oil prices fall. Because markets are cyclical, they always have been. And the government, which has based all its political legitimacy on maintaining these programs, cannot cut them without losing power. And so the money printing begins, the borrowing begins. They tell the public that the problems are temporary, caused by foreign interference, an American economic war, and capitalist sabotage. Classic third stage behavior. Textbook-style responses that haven't worked in any of the previous 27 attempts. In 2016, inflation rises to 800%. The government refuses to acknowledge there is a problem. In 2018, it's 65,000%. In 2019, it's 1,000,000%. To help your mind truly grasp what this means, let me put it into perspective. A cup of coffee that cost 450 bolivars in 2016 cost 3 million bolivars in 2019. 3 years. 3,000,000%. The value of the minimum wage had eroded so much that workers were no longer using paper bills as currency. Instead, by recycling them as scrap material, they were effectively earning more than the face value of the bills. The raw material of the paper as a physical object had become more valuable than the numbers printed on it. Think about that. The government had devalued the currency so much that the material the money was made of had become more valuable than the money itself. Doctors closed their practices. Lawyers abandoned their offices. Engineers abandoned their projects before they could be completed. It wasn't because they had lost interest in their work, their patients, or their clients. The economic system that made their professional activities sustainable had collapsed to such an extent that selling fruit on a street corner or mining Bitcoin on a home computer provided more real purchasing power than a decade of professional education and years of accumulated expertise. Millions of people left the country. The Western Hemisphere faced the largest refugee crisis in its history. Proportionally, more people left Venezuela than those who fled Syria during its civil war. Those who remained witnessed everything vanish, not just some things, not just most things, everything. The savings their parents had accumulated, the cultural heritage their grandparents had built. The work of several generations, all gone up in smoke. And yet some people had foreseen and witnessed this coming. Everyone who converted their bolivars into dollars, gold, or Bitcoin before 2015 carefully preserved their entire fortune. Everyone who waited, trusting the government's assurances and believing the situation couldn't possibly get that bad, lost everything they owned. Now, you must sharpen your focus like a knife, because we are applying this very same model to the United States today. And this is not a mere similarity, nor is it a superficial comparison. It is the exact same mechanism, the same numbers, and the same cause and effect relationship at work in the strongest economy the world has ever seen. The first phase has come to an end. In 1944 at Bretton Woods, the dollar became the global reserve currency, backed by gold at $35 per ounce, earning the trust of every country in the world, and serving as the foundation of the entire global trade system. The second phase was completed. In 1971, President Nixon ended the gold standard and closed the door on gold. From that moment on, the dollar transformed into a purely fiat currency, backed by nothing other than government decree and the global trust built up over decades. In 1971, U.S. federal debt stood at $398 billion. Today, it stands at $36.2 trillion. This represents a 9,000% increase. The M2 money supply has risen from $600 billion to over $21 trillion. For decades, this avalanche of monetary expansion did not lead to visible inflation in the country. The reason is this. The United States sold its inflation to the rest of the world. Every country that had to buy oil was forced to buy dollars. Every country engaged in international trade needed dollar reserves. Every central bank in the world regarded the dollar as its primary reserve asset. The U.S. could print money at will, and the entire world ended up bearing the brunt of that inflation. This is what constitutes an exorbitant privilege. The ability to expand your money supply and ensure that the consequences are felt not by your own citizens, but by the billions of people worldwide who are forced to use your currency and have no other choice. This is the most powerful economic advantage any nation possesses. And right now, as you read this, it is coming to an end in a measurable, documented, and irreversible way. Phase 3 is underway. The debt is numerically unpayable. The U.S. government paid over $1.1 trillion in interest alone in 2024. This is far larger than the entire defense budget. It exceeds the total amount spent on education, infrastructure, and scientific research. From here on out, the government has exactly 3 different options for closing this deficit. Option 1. Close the deficit by significantly raising taxes. Politically, this is out of the question. The public would revolt. Every politician who has ever attempted to raise taxes has paid the price at the ballot box, and they are well aware of this. The second option, closing the deficit by drastically cutting spending. This is also politically impossible. Every spending program has a base of supporters that would destroy any politician threatening to make cuts. Medicare, Social Security, defense. There is a voter base behind every line item. Third option, print more money. Guess which one they'll choose. Guess which one they'll keep choosing. The Federal Reserve tried the third option in reverse, attempting to combat the inflation caused by money printing by raising interest rates in 2022 and 2023. The result was a disaster. Banks began to fail. Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, First Republic. Markets became unstable. An emergency intervention was necessary. The Fed had to pause and change course. The trap has completely closed. They cannot raise interest rates without causing the system to collapse. They cannot lower interest rates without accelerating inflation. There's no way out. Although the government's official statistics may not fully reflect this situation, real-world inflation is already accelerating around you. Housing costs have risen by 47% since 2020. Food costs have increased by 31%. Insurance costs are up 38%. Healthcare costs have risen by 26%. While energy costs are volatile, they are structurally on an upward trend. These are not specific figures on the agenda of think tanks. These are documented price changes in actual goods and services, the things you buy every week, the bills you pay every month, and the cost you cannot avoid no matter how carefully you manage your budget. That make up real American life. And finally, the devaluation of the dollar, which will bring back all this exported inflation, has already begun. China and Russia are trading in yuan and rubles. Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan in exchange for oil. BRICS countries are beginning to establish alternative payment infrastructures explicitly designed to bypass the dollar. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has fallen from 72% in 2000 to approximately 58% today. This 14-point decline represents trillions of dollars in demand for an American currency that no longer exists. Now let me address your objections, because I can understand exactly what's going through your mind right now. You're thinking, but this time it's different. America is very powerful and failure is very unlikely. We have the world's strongest military. We have Silicon Valley. We are the architects of innovation and technology, something Rome and Weimar never possessed. Every collapsing empire has told itself exactly the same things. Rome believed its empire was immortal, sanctified by the gods, protected by the legions, and too powerful and sophisticated to fail. The Germans of 1920 believed that their industrial capacity, scientific excellence, and cultural sophistication made them immune to the kind of collapse that befell weaker nations. The Venezuelans believed that owning the world's largest oil reserves meant failure would never be an option. This historical cycle does not care about your military. It does not listen to your technology. It does not take into account your confidence, your innovation, or your belief in your own exceptionalism. It cares about only one thing: mathematics. When debt exceeds repayment capacity and money creation outpaces productive economic growth, the currency collapses every single time, without exception. The myth of the reserve currency deserves special attention because it is both the most seductive and the most dangerous. People say that the dollar is the global reserve currency, that this is why we are safe, that the rules don't apply to us, and that we are different from Rome, Weimar, and Venezuela. Yet the status of a reserve currency was precisely what allowed the second phase to last longer and take on a more extreme form than it normally would. As long as the pound was the reserve currency, Britain could print money as it pleased, until it ceased to be one. The Roman denarius was the reserve currency of the ancient world. The Spanish real was the global reserve currency in the 1500s, the Dutch guilder in the 1600s, the British pound throughout the 1800s and into the early 1900s. Historically, the average lifespan of a reserve currency is 94 years. The US dollar has held the title of reserve currency for approximately 80 years, since the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1945. We're not at the beginning. We're not even in the middle. We're definitely in the final stage. And when a reserve currency begins to collapse, it falls harder and faster than ordinary currencies, because once trust is lost, it circulates globally in exponentially greater quantities. So what should you do? How can you position yourself on the right side as this ongoing wealth transfer continues? First, understand this. Cash does not equate to security. Cash is something that is being eroded. Holding large amounts of cash or cash equivalent assets in the current environment is not a conservative strategy. It is a bet that the currency will retain its value, a bet that historical records show you will definitely lose. Second, shift your wealth into tangible assets, just as you did in the past. Do this not through paper instruments, ETFs, or certificates, but through physical gold and silver that you hold directly in your hands. Real estate in locations where productive activities will continue regardless of the currency used for pricing. And productive businesses that produce real goods and services people need, independent of economic conditions. Anything with intrinsic value that is not dependent on a government's ability to fulfill its purchasing power commitments. Bitcoin, if you truly understand its monetary characteristics, is not a speculative asset, but a sovereign store of value that no government can erode through inflation. These are not innovative ideas. These are the tangible steps that preserved wealth in Rome, Weimar, and Venezuela. Third, reduce your exposure to dollar-denominated obligations. Long-term government bonds. Certain pension payments that cannot be adjusted for inflation. Annual income that cannot be determined based on purchasing power that may no longer exist by the time the payments are due. Social Security payments tied to a government index that is technically inflation adjusted, but has historically underreported actual inflation during periods of rapid currency devaluation. Evaluate every financial instrument you hold through this lens. Does its value depend on the U.S. government maintaining the dollar's purchasing power 20 years from now? If the answer is yes, you need to thoroughly understand the historical track record of governments that have made the same promise in the past. Fourth, and this is a topic often overlooked in every financial planning discussion, build real productive capacity. Learn skills that create value, regardless of the currency in which they are priced. Build community relationships that provide genuine mutual support without relying on monetary systems. Reduce your dependence on complex supply chains. In Weimar, those who suffered the least were certainly not the ones who owned the most gold. They were the people who could produce anything others needed. Here is a summary of the situation. The United States is following a model that has facilitated the collapse of 27 civilizations over the past 2,000 years of recorded history. The first stage is complete. The second stage is complete. The third stage is currently underway as you watch this video. The fourth phase is on its way. The only question is timing, and timing is the one variable no one can predict with certainty. But the trajectory is certain. Mathematics guarantees it. Historical records point to this happening. And the only thing that separated those who survived by preserving their wealth from those who lost everything was a single, simple thing. They foresaw what was coming before the majority did, realized it wasn't too late to act, and acted accordingly. When the fourth stage begins, when the financial crisis reaches a point where everyone acknowledges it, there will be no time left to reposition yourself. Those unaffected by the financial collapse are those who prepared before the crisis became inevitable for everyone. You now have the information. The pattern is right before your eyes. 27 civilizations, one outcome. The only remaining variable is you.